Okay guys, so whether you're listening to this on the podcast or watching from YouTube, hello. Today we're going to be doing a different type of episode for the podcast. So we're going to do a Q&A episode, alright? So I've taken questions from Instagram and I'm going to answer them here. So I'm going to try and get through as many as I possibly can within reason, okay? So there are a lot there. So if we can even do like 10 to 15 in depth, then that'd be pretty good. Even 10 in depth and then maybe 10 shorter ones, that'd be good. So the reason we're doing this week is because I'm actually away in Brussels for the weekend and the Wi-Fi isn't great, so me and Paddy can't record a podcast as normal, but hopefully you will enjoy the kind of Q&A style episode because obviously these questions come from you and it's obviously better if the content is tailored to you. So we're going to get started, and the first question is there a difference between fasting 1 day a week and hitting below total daily energy expenditure daily? So my quick answer is going to be no. Okay, so you know that there's a simple answer, and that's no, and then there's kind of a more nuanced answer. And the more nuanced answer would be that if you're fasting 1 day a week, then maybe that day of the week you are far less active than you would be if you were eating. Okay, so that might influence your actual energy output on that day, okay, your energy expenditure. So if you find that when you have that fasting day, you drastically reduce your energy expenditure, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, you feel lazier, you don't walk as much, you try to take shortcuts. If you find that, and you find that on the other days you're just pretty normal, then maybe that might reduce your energy expenditure slightly and slightly reduce the extent of your deficit, you know. And similarly, if you find that on your regular days when you're just hitting a little bit below your TDEE, your total daily energy expenditure, so having that small deficit across the week instead of a massive deficit 1 day per week, if you find that style of eating just allows you to maintain your activity levels each day and give you more flexibility as to what days you can train on, because obviously you're not going to train on a fasting day, and that might be a better strategy. But to be honest, I think the quick answer is no, and you should be looking to do exactly, you know, what works for you essentially. But at the same time, I think fasting 1 day per week, like it's not the best strategy in the world. Practically, like for most people, they're going to struggle, you know, to fast 1 day per week on a consistent basis over time. So for example, if you were doing this as a lifestyle change, you know, this is your permanent lifestyle change, you're going from what you're doing now to doing something that you can sustain a deficit for a while and then maintain that weight loss over time, then I probably wouldn't go with a 1 day per week fast, just because I'm not sure how good you're going to be able to maintain that over time. So if you think you're going to be able to maintain that over time, then that's okay. But generally, I'd rather see something a little bit less restrictive, a little bit more based on kind of small changes, if it's going to be something that's sustainable over time. But again, you know, not all diets need to be sustainable, and rapid weight loss absolutely, you know, has a place. So I mean, a more aggressive calorie deficit for some people, particularly those without any history or current disordered eating behaviors. So if you have disordered eating behaviors in that you have a tendency to binge, you know, you're very emotionally tied to food, and you know, when your emotions are a little bit off, you just kind of binge and you feel real guilty about yourself, and you change how you feel based on what you eat, all that sort of stuff. So all those kind of disordered eating behaviors, if you find you're susceptible to those, then I probably wouldn't try fasting, just because it can get a little bit out of control. So what you can end up doing is, you know, having a fast 1 day, having a fast another day because you binged, and that sort of stuff, and it can get messy really, really fast. Okay, so that's kind of the one caveat that I would always put in there, and that kind of goes for any dietary method really. You know, you want to make sure that you are not exacerbating someone's disordered eating behaviors or tendencies towards that. And if you are listening to this and you find that you're just that type of person where you just have very little control, you feel like you lack control, and not only are you just making irrational food choices, but also your emotions are severely affected by that, then I would see someone who kind of specializes in that area, as opposed to just relying on kind of, you know, the typical fit fam advice when it comes to nutrition. So I hope that kind of answers that question. In short, there's probably not going to be a difference. The biggest, you know, contributor to fat loss over the course of a week is going to be the weekly deficit, okay? So obviously there's a big practical difference between reducing your calories slightly every day and having one just no food day per week. Difficult practically, especially if you have a variable life. You know, if it might be fine if you know there's one day per week every week where you just don't do anything. That's cool, it might suit you. But if you're someone with a variable lifestyle, you train on different days every week, it mightn't be as easy to schedule that in. So I would kind of, proceed cautiously. Question 2. Hi, I'm graduating with a nursing degree, but I've considered doing a master's in physiotherapy. Any advice? I suppose the first thing is to kind of know what you're getting into. And I guess if you've done a degree in nursing and you have hospital experience, then you probably have a fair idea of what physiotherapy entails. Okay, so that's kind of the first thing I tell everyone when they ask me about physio, is that, to recognize that you're not just going into physio to be like some sort of, strength and conditioning coach, because some people go into physio thinking that sort of stuff. They think they're going to, be putting their hands on people and solving all the problems and giving them the special exercises that solve everyone's problems, and it's all athletes and all that. But in reality, physio is more so, especially now, given that, we're living longer and non-communicable diseases are more of a problem, you tend to work with a lot of the older population. So, there's a couple of different branches to physiotherapy. So you've got your musculoskeletal physiotherapy, which is kind of your typical physio that everyone thinks of. So, you've got, a tendinopathy, or your post-fracture, or, you've got a sore shoulder. That's all the musculoskeletal side of things. And you've also got orthopedics within that, which might be people after total hip replacement, total knee replacement, that sort of stuff. Okay, so that's your kind of musculoskeletal side of things. Muscle, skeletal, bone. Okay, so it's kind of the muscles and bone side of things. Obviously tendons, ligaments, and the whole person, etc. But that's the musculoskeletal branch of things. Then you've got your respiratory physiotherapy, where you're going to be working with, people with chronic respiratory conditions like COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, people with asthma, some other chronic conditions, maybe lung cancer and stuff like that, interstitial lung disease, pulmonary fibrosis, and then you might have, some of the younger population, especially as it relates to cystic fibrosis. Okay, so physiotherapy is very important for that population. So they're the types of things that you might see when working in respiratory physiotherapy. And then you've got neurological physiotherapy, and that's more related to your strokes, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease, etc. So all those types of things, chronic neurological conditions that people might be dealing with, so they do all have their different aspects, and they're kind of the main branches, but it obviously branches off further in that you could be working, in oncology specifically. You could be working in palliative care. You could just be working in a general care of the elderly ward, and getting people up after operations and stuff like that. Okay, so it does really vary in terms of what physiotherapy can offer you. So I think that's probably the most important thing, is just to recognize what I said and realize that there's a lot that goes into it that people don't really think about. Okay, so people just think of the outpatient musculoskeletal side of things, whereas there's a lot more to it, and obviously that has implications for where you're going to end up working. Because if you think that you're just getting into physio and you're obviously going to get a musculoskeletal job, then that might require you doing clinical rotations in all of those areas first, and then specializing within a hospital with the musculoskeletal stuff, and then eventually opening up your private practice down the road. So that's how the path might look. So I think it's just important to realize that. That's probably the best advice, along with realizing that the master's program is quite condensed. It's going to require a lot of your time for 2 years, going to be relatively challenging, but you're in and out pretty quickly, and it's nice to have that professional qualification in your pocket. So I hope that helps in some way. Next question, thoughts on marijuana. I don't really have any thoughts on marijuana. We're quite focused obviously on the health side of things here at Triage, so I wouldn't be recommending that people use marijuana. Like, yeah, you can go on about how there's special clinical cases where medical marijuana might be warranted, but we don't deal with those cases. We're advising the general population on how to best kind of manage their health and stay fit and get strong, etc. And to me, marijuana just doesn't have a place in there, and not only for any potential deleterious effects in your health, but also generally because we like to promote self-efficacy at Triage quite a bit, so we don't want people to have crutches in their life that they rely on to get through each day. Okay, so if marijuana is something you rely on, then I would be looking to address other aspects of your life, and the same goes for alcohol or any other drug that you're going to be using to try and kind of use as a coping mechanism for life. So I would be addressing those things and point you to kind of seeing those as problems as opposed to just coping with marijuana. And some people say other things like, oh, but it helps you sleep. It doesn't help you sleep. Marijuana doesn't help you sleep. It might help you get to sleep, but it compromises the quality of your sleep. So you're essentially just going to sleep and not getting the benefits of it. And that's the same goes for alcohol in that case as well. So it's just important to understand those things. And when looking for advice on marijuana, don't ask your stoner friend who read a few articles online, because you actually have to kind of look at the scientific evidence side of things and see what effects you're interested in. So if you're more interested in what sort of things marijuana might do to your health, then I'd be looking more towards PubMed or articles with references and stuff like that, as opposed to just pop science articles on the internet. Did you have a good time in your holidays? Yes, I did. Did you? I hope you did. We're still here this morning in Brussels, so we've got until like 2 o'clock, so I gotta get this Q&A out of the way so we can go enjoy Brussels. But yeah, it's been enjoyable. Do you have any articles on the basics or steps of cutting? I'm 105 kg, lots of fat, lots of gains. At least you've got lots of gains. That's one of the good things about muscle, in that you can have a much higher BMI, much more body fat than someone else, but if you've got muscle, you're in a much better position in terms of health and longevity. So that's one of the things that I would say is important to realize about if you are in the overweight or obese category, or if you're carrying a lot of body fat, is to realize that even if you are really struggling with the weight loss side of things, and you think that's not something you're going to be able to do in the next 6 months to a year or whatever, you're just not able, you're not in the position, life's throwing lots of things at you, then you can gain muscle and still get fit and still improve your health. Okay, so health, even if you're overweight and obese, is not just about the weight, it's not just about fat loss, it's also about looking at the bigger picture and recognizing that exercise has a role there regardless of who you are, of what weight you are. It still plays a role. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2 then, about the cutting, and there's no particular best practice for steps of cutting, and that it's going to vary for pretty much everyone. Okay, the only thing that we know is that you need to be in a calorie deficit, so you need to find some way that you can reduce your caloric intake in such a way that you can continue to lose fat over time, or over a short period of time, if that's what might be best for you. I can't tell you that because I don't know anything else about you other than your body weight. Okay, so there's no particular steps that you need to go through, but if I was someone that was trying to guide myself in terms of you're just taking this advice that I'm giving you, I would probably look at my diet and see, are there any obvious things that I can change here that are just stupid? Like if you're a college student, for example, and you go for your lunch every day and you have a chicken roll, a bag of crisps and a bottle of Coke, it's like, all right, you can improve that. Surely that's something that's fairly obvious to be improved. But it's not like you have to just go totally to the polar opposite, side of things and just get a fucking salad and full stop. That's not how it needs to be. What I would do in that case is say, all right, I actually really love my chicken roll, so I'm going to have my chicken roll, but I'm going to have a Diet Coke, and instead of crisps, I'm going to have an apple. Boom. All right, that's a reduction in your caloric intake, a significant reduction in your caloric intake, because probably 100 less calories in the crisps and probably 200 less calories from the Coca-Cola, I think. But that's 300 calories gone from your day. So if you are at maintenance, then you're now in a deficit. Boom, you're in a deficit and you just made that small change. And the great thing about that is that it doesn't require a lot of change in terms of your schedule. So it's very easy behavior change to put into practice. So you don't need to change the meals that you prep. You don't need to go home and spend an hour or two, filling Tupperware with all your meals. So that's a relatively simple change that you can put into practice. The other thing about that as well is that there's kind of social benefits. Okay, so one of the big challenges for people when they start trying to lose fat and change their diet for the positive is that they have to kind of change the person that they are within their social circle, okay? So for example, your friends might think of you as the person that always eats big meals, you know, you're a bit of a legend for that, you know, when we go out for food, you always get big meals, that's cool. It's your friends might give you stick about that. It's kind of normal. It's Ireland. You're a lad. We tend to give each other stick about everything. All right. So you might get a bit of stick about that normally. So for example, if you were to go to the shop and you were now to get your salad, you probably get stick from the lads. You might feel a little bit uncomfortable with it. While you shouldn't really have to feel bad about health decisions. It might be something that you just don't really feel comfortable with, especially at the start when you're trying to make sustainable behavior change. It can be difficult. Okay. So what I would be saying is that if you've just swapped to a Diet Coke and you swap to an apple and you're still having your chicken roll, it's like, that's a relatively minute change, okay? So it's not something that massively changes your identity, you know, who you identify as and who your friends feel that you are. And that might sound like something insignificant, but it's actually pretty significant in practice when you try to get people to change their behaviors, because they're essentially trying to change who they are, who they feel they are, and who their friends recognize them as. And while I don't think I would struggle with that side of things, I can appreciate how others do struggle with it. And then after that, in terms of cutting, obviously you want to have a decent level of activity. If you were exercising when you're training, brilliant, you know, that's obviously best practice. We want to see someone training towards something, training towards having more muscle mass, having better cardiorespiratory fitness, etc. That's all very important, but also just generally being active. So if you're quite sedentary, you play video games, you work in an office, you don't really walk much, trying to get your steps up, your daily steps up, like going out for a walk actively, maybe in the morning, in the evening, you know, going for a little stroll on your lunch break, not taking the stairs, parking further away, all those sorts of things. I'd be looking to put those in practice just because it's an easy way to increase your, you know, daily energy expenditure, or if you want to gimmick it up, boost your metabolism, okay? So that's essentially what it's doing if you're talking about metabolism as being the, you know, accumulation of all of the energy that you burn throughout the day, okay? If that's what it means to you, then you boost your metabolism. Other than that, you know, it's difficult to give you specific advice because I don't know if you've already started dieting. I don't know what you've struggled with in the past. I don't know what your diet currently looks like. So do we have any articles? Yes, we have a free article on site on the basics of setting up your nutrition. You know, I think it's titled Fundamental Nutritional Science, Calories and Macronutrients. It's a fairly basic article. It just runs you through the basics of, you know, how to, you know, at least find your maintenance caloric intake, how to get into a deficit, etc. It is quite dated. We probably need to review it and just take a look, make sure it's still everything we agree with. But that's an article you can start off with. Also, when you sign up with our email list, we do send you the kind of Living Lean, which is a periodized nutrition ebook. It's just a pretty generic way of adjusting your nutrition over time for the kind of typical person that is kind of involved in fitness already, who, you know, is interested in cutting down for a while, gaining for a while, maintaining for a while, that sort of thing. But that mightn't be where you are right now. So you might need to just start with basic behavior changes and that sort of stuff. And we will be updating our fundamentals ebook this January, so that'll be out in January, and that's essentially going to be an ebook that is designed for people like yourself and other people here that are just getting into the swing of things, okay? So you're not one of the heavily involved fit farmers, you're getting into things. It's for the beginners. That's what we want that book to be for, so expect that coming soon. Paddy Farrell, why do you always go on holidays when there's work to do? Because, you know, my mother runs a secret private business in the home, and she says that I need to leave the house 4 times a year for them to run their meetings. So, gotta do what you gotta do. Lauren, Ryan, I just realized I wasn't saying names all along. Probably should have said names. I think it's good to recognize that people are asking these. Lauren Ryan asks, is it possible to be in an anabolic state if training very heavily cardiovascularly? Is it possible? Yes. Okay. Is it possible to be in an anabolic state? Yes, it is. But, you know, it depends, okay? And it depends as well. It's not just a cop-out answer when someone says it depends. But one of the problems with people, more and more people saying it depends, especially on social media, is that people say it depends and then they don't tell you what it depends on and when it depends on it and how to find out, what the right answer is. So people instead just kind of just throw it depends out there and list a load of variables and don't really explain much. So what this depends on is, one, your history with strength training. Okay, so excuse me. So for example, if you have been weight training for a long period of time, you've already built muscle, you've already built strength, and then you start training very heavily from a cardiovascular perspective, so you're doing lots of running, for example, then in that context, it's less likely that you're going to be in a good position to build muscle, because you've taken your genetics, you've maybe trained for a few years and really tried to squeeze out as much gains as you could in that period of time, and then when you're at that point, you generally need to do more to gain less. So if you're taking away some of your anabolic potential by doing loads of cardiovascular work, then that's more meaningful to you, because you were already in a position where you were only getting a small return for a large investment of effort and total work. Okay, so obviously the more trained you become, the more things you have to do right. So if you are suddenly taking away some of your strength training in place of lots of cardiovascular training, then that's probably not a good move from an anabolic perspective. Whereas if you're on the other side of things and you're let's say you're an endurance runner, you're running like 4 or 5 days a week, but you've never done any strength training ever, it was never a thing that you did, maybe you also never focused on your diet, you never ate adequate protein, you were always in a calorie deficit, etc., and now you begin strength training, and with building muscle and strength in mind, and you eat a higher protein diet and a calorie surplus, then yes, you are in an anabolic state. You absolutely have potential to build muscle. Could you build more muscle if you were doing only like 2 cardiovascular sessions a week and you were doing mostly strength training? Yeah, probably. But clearly, if you're training very heavily cardiovascularly, there's a goal there. Okay, so there's a goal there already. So we just have to realize that is the context that we're dealing with. So it's sort of a spectrum. It's like, are you the beginner? Are you the beginner to strength training who was previously doing everything poorly that would lead to anabolism? Or are you the advanced strength trainee who's now doing cardiovascular work and was already doing all of the strength training and muscle building things well? If you're that person, it's going to be difficult to build muscle. If you're this person, it's still going to be pretty easy to build muscle, okay? So it's spectrum there. So what you want to do is do most of the things that you can well, okay? So for example, don't be in a calorie deficit, okay? If you're training for endurance sports or whatever, and you're now adding in strength training as well, and you're increasing your total training load, then you want to recognize that, all right, I might need more food in my diet. I might need to eat more to support this training. So, being in a relative energy deficit over time is a problem in endurance sports. So you do have to be kind of mindful of that. Not just from not building muscle, but from a health perspective. So you want to make sure you're at least at maintenance, and preferably if you're in a phase where you're trying to build muscle, you want to be in a surplus. And you also want to make sure that you're eating adequate protein, okay? So if you're currently, only eating a gram of protein per kilo of your body weight, then getting that up to at least 1.5 grams per kilo of your body weight, and between that 1.5 to 2 gram range, that'd be brilliant. That'd be a really good step for you to support muscle building, okay? And obviously then, you want to sleep well, you want to make sure that your total training load isn't too high in general. So for example, you could be training very heavily cardiovascularly, but it could still be too much. You could be doing like 14 sessions a week, and the only reason you're training is for casual 10Ks or something. So you have to, think about the goal, what your overall goal is, and then how much effort you can afford to actually put into strength training and to building muscle. And that's probably the best answer I have, just to recognize that it is a spectrum. If you're not doing ridiculous amounts of cardiovascular work, you generally don't have to be too worried about a sort of interference effect in terms of cardio compromising your gains. A moderate amount of cardiovascular work can support your gains. You want to have a good level of fitness that is good for your gains. good for your recovery between sessions, your recovery within the session, tolerating more volume over time. They're all benefits. But obviously there's a point of diminishing returns whereby if you continue to do more and more cardiovascular work, it is eventually going to compromise your strength training. So just keep those things in mind. Next question, advice for seeking a girlfriend with the same values and viewpoint in life as you, without actively seeking it, so to speak, and just going with the flow. I'm not a relationship guru, am I? But my immediate answer to this would be, don't. I don't think it's a useful thing to try and seek a girlfriend with the same values and viewpoint in life as you. You know, you want, not that you want, but I mean, it's totally okay to have someone that has different values and different viewpoints than you, okay? Because if you're in this position and you're looking for that type of person, then you're acting on the assumption that somehow your values and viewpoints are superior to everyone else's, okay? And I don't think that's a good thing. Like, I know that personally, I have values and viewpoints that have changed over time, you know, that I'm glad that they changed over time. So it's not like, 21-year-old me had the exact same values and viewpoints on everything as 23-year-old me. So, if 21-year-old me was to go and, find a girlfriend that was the exact same values as me, do you want to just live in an echo chamber whereby you both just kind of feed on each other's values and viewpoints and confirm each other's biases over time? Like, no, you don't want that, okay? So if someone has different values and viewpoints to you, that's okay, as long as they're not ridiculous. Like, I mean, if she's literally a Nazi and she's like fucking Hitler posters all over her room, then I would be like, all right, like, maybe let's not do this. But I mean, if you have slight differences in your political views or what you want to get out of life and stuff like that, that's totally normal. Like, me and my girlfriend definitely do not share the same values and viewpoints on everything. And I think if we did, it probably wouldn't be the best thing, because I think there are probably things that I could challenge her on that would be a benefit to her, and things that she could challenge me on that would be of benefit to me. And I think without that, you're not really kind of helping each other develop. And I think if you're that person that just thinks that your values and viewpoints are always the best and there's no way you can possibly change them, then you're probably ignorant and closed-minded. I'm not saying this about you, Jack, because I kind of get where you're coming from, in that I think when you say values and viewpoints, you're probably thinking more along the lines of, you don't like going out in the session all the time, you like going to the gym and that sort of stuff, and maybe you don't want to go out with someone who is like a session moth or something along those lines. So, there's obviously there's a spectrum there. So yeah, that's sort of my best answer, is that yeah, you probably want to find someone that isn't totally ridiculous or totally polarized to you, but you also don't want to find someone that just confirms everything that you say, that listens to you and just kind of acts like your little puppy and confirms everything that you say and is like, oh, you're so right with everything. Like, that's not healthy in my opinion. And how to go and seek that person that doesn't have totally different things in terms of liking the gym and not wanting to go out and stuff like that. They don't need to, they just don't need to. But I mean, if you're within certain social circles, then I imagine you're not aligning yourself with social circles in which people that you don't associate with are going to be in anyway. So I don't know, because I don't know much about your social life, but that's probably my best advice. Call me relationship guru. Next question, Mairead. Thoughts on the Jefferson curl for lower back pain specifically? Should you progressively load them? Okay, so when it comes to using an exercise like the Jefferson curl, so for people who don't know what a Jefferson curl is, just look it up. It's essentially like a stiff leg deadlift variation whereby you actually go into maximal spinal flexion and move your spine as much as you can, as well as your hips, with the goal of essentially bringing the bar or kettlebell or dumbbell down as close to your toes and past, if you can stand on a box, as possible. So the first thing is that the main benefit, in my opinion, of a Jefferson curl for someone with lower back pain is going to be psychological, okay? So you essentially want to challenge any fear of movement that person has, and those kind of fear avoidance behaviors that people might have. So if people have adopted certain maladaptive coping strategies, in that if they go to pick up a pen now, they don't pick it up as you normally would. They wouldn't just bend down and do it freely. They might, you know, put their two hands on their knees, bend over in, you know, a neutral spine, and then they really kind of rotate down slowly and pick up the pen. Like if people are starting to adopt behaviors like that just based on back pain, then you want to kind of challenge those, you know. And if someone has really been avoiding any sort of spinal flexion, then they're the things you kind of want to be challenging. Okay, so I would say the benefits are primarily psychological, but obviously they facilitate changes in movement after that. Okay, so if you're changing you're changing someone's movement behavior potentially, which has, you know, both psychological and physical effects. So that's step one, in that I don't think Jefferson curls are necessarily going to have any effect on anything in the spine or around the spine directly that's going to reduce someone's pain by increasing tolerance or anything like that. Like it has the potential to do that. I probably used to believe they did in the past more than I do now. I think now I would be more looking towards the psychological effects of using an exercise like that. And it doesn't have to be the Jefferson curl. It could simply be getting someone to reach down towards their toes in spinal flexion to just kind of increase their tolerance, both physically and psychologically, to going there. So yeah, that's point number one, is that's the most important thing. Now, point number two is like, should you progressively load them? I'm not sure. If you'd asked me a year ago, I probably would have said yeah, like, because I think maybe like 1 or 2 years ago, I was probably in the more of the mindset that just get everything strong through all of its ranges regardless. But I think to justify that stance, you'd have to have a good solid evidence base to suggest that there are no negative effects on the spine or the discs or pain over time by progressive loading in that sort of, you know, beyond the neutral zone inflection of the spine. Okay, so you'd need to, I think you'd have to have a good amount of evidence to suggest that, just because if you look at the evidence that has kind of informed the more neutral spine side of things, it's pretty strong that it's got multiple layers, and particularly for progressively loaded movements. Okay, so I wouldn't just, you know, throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that because you know, flexion isn't necessarily bad, that we should be looking to rapidly load it, you know, as much as possible with loads of volume like we would any other exercise. I'm not sure that's the case, and I think you just need evidence to justify that. So I mean, the other part of that is that we are going into flexion all of the time anyway. Even if you do a squat or a deadlift with something that visually looks like a neutral spine, you are objectively in flexion. Okay, so we have evidence that came out this year to suggest that even when people are looking to maintain that neutral spine, they're still in flexion. Okay, so they're still within that. They're still in the kind of neutral zone, but they're in the flexion side of that. Okay, so you could still be in like 10 to 30 degrees of flexion, and it might look like neutral. Okay, but obviously the flexion in an individual segment doesn't necessarily reflect the flexion of the whole spine, so that has to be considered too. But I guess you just have to, well, it's funny. Laura's cooking and she's like, oh my god, they're going to hear me, but the microphone's pointing this way, so it should be okay. So yeah, just to kind of put that all into one little package. All right, so we know that flexion in everyday life probably isn't a problem. Okay, so if you're flexing to pick up a pen, I'm sitting here flexed, that sort of stuff, that's probably not a big deal. If you're flexing lifting light loads, that's probably not a big deal. If you go into a little bit of flexion on some of your deadlift reps and stuff like that, I wouldn't be getting too stressed about that. But I mean, do we take that to the extreme and say that we should progressively load end range flexion in as much flexion as we possibly can with lots of reps, lots of sets over time? I'm not sure, okay, because we don't have the evidence that gives us the answers as to what adaptations take place. So the spine, you know, is likely to adapt, just like any other area of the body. So it's going to adapt. The discs might adapt, you know, the ligaments might adapt, the bones might adapt to some degree, the muscles around that area are going to adapt. So if all those things can adapt, and we have evidence of that, then what we can say is that, oh, this is actually beneficial because you increase tolerance over time. But I think it's probably just good to be conservative there and not to, you know, go totally to the extreme and just conclude that without any evidence of that, you know. So there is evidence to suggest that the ligaments of the spine do undergo creep, in that they lengthen with that sort of repeated flexion. So I think, you know, that's like, all right, now we know that. What does that mean? You know, so you kind of have to put that into the bigger picture, and for that we need more evidence on longer term loading of the spine in you know, flexion that is intentional. Okay, so not just a little bit of flexion in a deadlift, but I mean, we're trying to maximize flexion. Okay, so until that point, I would probably be more conservative in loading flexion of the spine. I still think it's probably a good idea, and I'd be happy to recommend someone that do a Jefferson curl type of exercise, but, you know, having previously assessed their active range. So how far can you get into spinal flexion actively, you know, with control, without the weight just pulling you beyond that. Okay, I think you can do that sort of stuff, and there are definitely some exercises that you can go into flexion and extension on that aren't a problem, but you just have to ask yourself, you know, am I willing to just go all out and just suggest that flexion doesn't matter at all, load it up as much as you want, loads of volume, loads of reps, loads of sets. I'm not sure about that. Okay, and my opinion on that will change over time as the evidence changes, and it's likely that either of those things could be the end result. So we might find out that, you know, when you train flexion over time, your discs become ridiculously resilient and all this sort of stuff. You might find that over time, when you train flexion, you get a more rapid increase in disc degeneration and stuff like that. So there's no answer I can give you that's perfect, but your question specifically was about, should you progressively load them for lower back pain? I'm not sure. You know, I don't think there's a clear answer there. It depends, you know, why you have lower back pain, whether it's chronic. But I know you're actually, you lift, like you train for powerlifting. So I mean, the biggest variable there that's going to affect pain over time in someone who is training for powerlifting is load management. Okay, so the way in which you progress your loading over time and how much total loading you have within your program. So for example, if you're doing like 20 sets of squats a week and 15 sets of deadlifts, well, that's a lot of volume. You have to ask yourself, how did I get there? Okay, so if you went from half that level of volume and jumped up and then started to have pain, then the best thing you could do would be to reduce total volume, reduce the intensity you're working at, and reduce your relative intensity in terms of leaving more reps in reserve on each set. That's the biggest thing you need to worry about with low back pain as it relates to strength training. But yeah, and just one more point on that side of things. You know, we know that, you know, disc degeneration, bulging discs, etc., all the disc talk, it's fairly poorly related to pain. Okay, so there's a pretty high base rate of disc degeneration and, you know, bulging discs, so to speak. There's a fairly high base rate, which means that there's a high prevalence of those things in the general asymptomatic population. So people who have no symptoms of lower back pain can still have those things. So we know that those things aren't necessarily associated with pain, and we also know that you can have pain that exists in the back as a result of no identifiable pathology. So if you know that you can have the things that might indicate pathology without pain, and you know that you can have pain without any of those things indicative of pathology, then you need to look beyond specific structural solutions. So for example, I know, Mairead, you don't think this, but if you were speaking to someone, you know, and they tell you that, oh, it's this one specific muscle that's the problem, that's a pretty strong and specific conclusion to come to, and you'd need to have good evidence to support that. Similarly, you know, you might go to a chiropractor who kind of readjusts something, and it's like, all right, that might necessarily be the solution either. So you have to just consider the bigger picture, consider what's contributing to pain, and then go with your best bets when it comes to lower back pain as it relates to strength training. And that is probably load management. That's probably the most important thing. If there are other lifestyle variables that you deal with in terms of your occupation that exacerbate your pain, then you may need to have some, you know, activity modification there. But obviously, if you are dealing with pain, consult with a physiotherapist. and don't just trust my advice on a video. But I hope that answers your question, Mairead. In short, there's no short, quick answer. There's no simple answer to that question. I don't know if you should progressively load them. I think while it's a position I would have held in the past at some point, it's taking it to the extreme to suggest that it just doesn't matter and you can load it as much as you want, but it's also extreme to suggest that we should all maintain a perfectly neutral spine all the time. So context matters. You need to think of the total load and repetitions, etc., when you're thinking about flexion as being good or bad, etc. All right. That was a big overview, and I could probably give you a better answer if I had actually reviewed some of the evidence I'm talking about in my head before discussing this. But yeah, we can chat more about it if you want. Biggest calorie deficit. From Francisco VZ12. Biggest calorie deficit you ever tried and succeeded using on a cut. That was earlier this year when I dieted for 5 weeks prior to Bali. I ate about 1800 calories on average, which isn't that low for some people, but is very low for me. Okay, so I was quite active on placement at the time, walking to and from placement. My maintenance caloric intake was probably around 2800 at the time. So it's a 1000 calorie deficit for me, which is a fairly significant deficit over the course of, a 5 week period. So yeah, that was the largest deficit I've tried. But I don't think you don't necessarily need to shy away from more aggressive calorie deficits, provided again that you don't have any disordered eating behaviors. Okay, so if you're someone who every time you get into a deficit you start to binge and you already have a poor relationship with food, then that to me would be contraindication for aggressive calorie deficit. Okay, but yeah, 1000 to answer your question. Just curious, I heard that squatting can boost testosterone. What's your thoughts on this? Okay, so step one, small changes here and there within the physiological range of testosterone are not very meaningful, not very important. But more specifically to this question, if you're talking about the effects that lifting might have on testosterone and other hormones post training, then that's relatively irrelevant for your gains. Okay, so the acute hormonal response to lifting does not necessarily have an effect on your gains. Okay, so we have evidence to support that you do see differences in certain hormones post training, and that will vary between high intensity and moderate intensity training and different lifts that you do, etc. But that's not relevant to your gains, so I wouldn't be worried about that. So the answer is it doesn't matter. Muscle memory. How long should it take to get back to your original size if out of the gym for approximately 6 weeks? Firstly, you mightn't have actually lost any size in 6 weeks. Like some people will. You probably feel a little bit smaller anyway, just as a result of muscle glycogen not necessarily being stored in your muscles anymore. And that's a pretty obvious and understandable response from the body, in that you don't need to store loads of carbohydrate within your muscles if you were not training. Okay, so if you haven't been training, then there's no need for your body to completely replenish those muscle glycogen stores, since they don't have the demand for that glycogen, that glucose, that ATP in the first place. So you probably feel a bit smaller as a result of that. Your muscle's not storing as much glycogen. So glycogen is essentially your muscle carbohydrate store that also stores water with it. So you're going to feel a little bit deflated as a result of not lifting. In terms of loss of muscle mass, you just probably didn't lose much. So there's no real answer, because being out of the gym for 6 weeks doesn't really mean anything in terms of regaining gains. What's more relevant is how much muscle you lost. So I was out of the gym for 6 weeks because I was undergoing chemotherapy for cancer treatment. It's like, whoa, all right, now we're talking a different game, because you've obviously lost lots of gains. But you were out of the gym for 6 weeks because you were playing more football or whatever. It's like, not important. You're going to get those gains back fast. Okay, so it depends on how much you actually lost. You probably didn't lose much, and you're going to get it back pretty fast. So the best advice you can give to someone that's coming back from training is to start slowly. Do not go back in the training plan you were on before you took 6 weeks off. You're going to be very sore. Maybe start with 1 to 2 sets max of each exercise. You normally might do 3 to 5, and leave about 3 reps in the tank on week 1 for sure. Okay. Be conservative with the ranges of motion that you use. So for example, if you normally do, lots of end range exercises, for example, like a stiff leg deadlift where you're going to get lots more muscle damage down in that end range because the muscle is lengthened, maybe just be conservative with the range that you use on week 1. The result of all of that is that you're going to be essentially taking advantage of the repeated bout effect. So adaptations that take place early on in training that protect you against subsequent muscle soreness. So that delayed onset muscle soreness that you generally experience, you will not experience it that quite as bad if you start really light and then on week 2 begin to progress things. As if you were to go back in and start going to failure in end ranges with lots of volume on week 1, you are going to be crippled, and that's not the goal. So yeah, there's no answer how long it takes to get it back. I don't know. I don't even know if you lost anything. Is cutting out complex carbs a good weight loss method, and will reintroducing them result in weight gain? No, it's not a good weight loss method. It's a fairly poor strategy, to be honest, in that sources of complex carbohydrates are generally your sources of fiber and sources of a pretty wide variety of micronutrients and phytonutrients and antioxidants, and it's just a generally poor strategy to try and reduce a pretty core part of a healthful diet. So I mean, if you're going to say that I'm gonna take sweet potatoes and I'm gonna take my lentils and I'm gonna take my oats out of my diet, like, that's just a pretty poor strategy. Like, I would be more inclined to suggest reducing the clear disposable parts of your diet. So for example, if you cook all of your meals in oil, boom, there you go, that's loads of calories gone by just not doing that anymore. Choose leaner cuts of meat, stop snacking. Those sorts of things are far better strategies than to just cut complex carbs out of your diet, because I assume you're trying to just cut carbs in total, because obviously, like, it wouldn't make much sense from a weight loss perspective to keep in like sugary type of foods and then just cut out all the fibrous ones. I don't think that's probably not a good strategy. So I imagine your strategy here is to totally cut out carbohydrates, or at least minimize them, and I think that's a fairly not, like, I don't think that's a useful strategy for fat loss for a lot of people, just because, like, it's unless you're trying to rapidly lose fat, you're trying to really reduce your calories as low as you can possibly get them. I don't see why you wouldn't keep in foods that are quite healthful, supporting your digestive health, supporting your fullness, so to maintain your fullness as you're dieting and stuff like that. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a good strategy. And will reintroducing them back result in weight gain? Yes, because you have removed a certain amount of calories from your diet. I mean, if you remove 500 calories worth of complex carbohydrate sources and then you add those 500 calories back in, if that puts you back in maintenance, then no, you're not going to gain weight, bar some initial gain in water weight. But I mean, if you take out 1,000 calories and you were already in a 500 calorie surplus, you take those out and then you put them back in, and yes, you're going to gain weight because you're going to be back in a surplus. So yeah, I just think that's a relatively short-sighted way of looking at how to change your diet with the goal of weight loss, so I wouldn't be recommending it.